I think it's time to get started here. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a good start to your day. I hear from Jeff it's going to be a beautiful one. So it's a good day to have a good day. My name is Monica Jean. I'm a field crops educator based out of the Central Michigan region, and today I'm going to be your host with Marty Chilvers. And I'm excited to be on here. This is always a great program, so excited to hear what Marty has to say. And with that, Marty. Are you ready?
I'll
I
unmute
can't hear you.
myself
There
too. How
you
about that?
go.
Well,
Well, Marty Chilvers is a specialist based on campus here, and I'm excited to hear about what the pathology status is for the state of Michigan. So thank you.
all right. Thanks, Monica, for the introduction. Okay, good morning, everybody. Please put your questions into the chat box as we go through this. A lot more enjoyable to answer questions than talk to just a camera. But let's jump in. So I think one of the diseases that's really been on everyone's mind this year is stripe rust. We saw this back in 2016, so I'll go back a little bit in time and just chat about that really quickly. So just really quick, stripe rust, once we get to this adult plant stage, we will pretty easily identify this disease by the stripes that those rust pustules form on the leaves. On young plants, however, the rust pustules will sort of have more of a random pattern. They won't have that striped appearance. The other thing I think that's been confusing people this year is some of what we call adult plant resistance. So when the fungus infects the plant and the plant is showing a resistance response, we won't necessarily get pustule development. So if you're seeing sort of bright yellow streaks, that may very well be stripe rust. So certainly get a sample into the diagnostic clinic if you're not sure. So generally this disease is favored by cool and wet conditions. Inoculum, however, for all of these rust diseases moves up from the south every year. So it doesn't typically overwinter up north. It needs that living green tissue to survive on and moderate temperatures. So we see development down south and it moving north. So that's good because we can watch maps and sort of keep an eye on what is coming. So that's somewhat helpful. So here's a quick screenshot of that rust that we have been seeing, and here's the get this live view up here. Here's a live view of this map. So you can go onto this website, and we'll put the link in the chat box there. So you can move around and have a look at where stripe rust has been confirmed. As you can see, the state of Kansas, they've confirmed stripe rust in about 3/4 of the counties down there. And what we're looking for typically is development down south. And earlier this year, back in February, I was hearing a little bit of reports down in Louisiana. So things started to roll in very late February. Didn't seem like it was really taking off terribly bad. It certainly developed with time. So we've got quite a few reports in Oklahoma, Kansas. We had a couple of reports between us in those other states. So Southern Illinois and central northern Indiana there. So yeah, stripe rust was confirmed around about the 13th in Ingham County, maybe a little bit earlier, but it's certainly moved fairly quickly. However, it hasn't moved as quickly as we've seen stripe rust move in the past. And what I'm talking about there is the epidemic that we had back in 2016. Let me see if I can get back to my slide deck now. There it is. All right. But it did certainly catch some of our researchers on campus off guard. It moved in quite quickly. It was on the perimeter of plots, down low. It was a bit of people were wondering what was going on. By the time we got in there to put fungicide on it, had done quite a bit of damage. So you can see in here all these various plots, quite lit up with stripe rust. It just moves very, very quickly. I think the other thing that's really of interest here is that it really does tend to have hot spots or disease foci in a field. So that's just the nature of it. Microclimates and where spores are getting deposited and it's going through that reproductive cycle. It takes about 10 days for it to produce new spores and then go out and infect plants. And you can see how heavy the infection was here. It's turning the ground orange with all the spores that are coming out of that leaf tissue. So back in 2016, we had, I think, what was a far more severe stripe rust epidemic across the state. So we had a lot more stripe rust reports earlier down in Oklahoma. So this is some photos of hay cutting down in Oklahoma, and you can see that the back of the mower here is just covered in rust. So we just had so much more inoculum so much earlier, and that resulted in a far more severe epidemic. And our first report was something like May 2nd for 2016. So the earlier it gets here and the more this rust spores are available to start that epidemic, the worse it can get. So on campus that year in 2016, this was kind of interesting. The timing, fungicide timing was really critical. So what we saw, at least in central Michigan on campus here, is that the application really the fungicide application really had to go on at that flag leaf timing. If we were early, that T1, that fixed 5-6 timing, it wasn't enough. It didn't still, that fungicide activity was worn off by that point. And until flowering, we were too late. So disease had just ripped through the plots pretty aggressively. It wasn't the case all the way across the state. There were other areas that early application followed by that one at heading was sufficient. But I think this just sort of goes to show that you really need to be out scouting your fields and getting a good idea of what disease pressure is out there. And this goes for other diseases too, such as septoria or Staganospora, just being aware of what pressures are out there and treating for those pressures. So we've asked questions about, okay, so if we're going to make a blanket timing we're going to go out at T1, what do we typically see from that? So we pulled together data from a number of different groups, ourselves, Martin Nagelkirk at the time, and Kurt Steinke's soil fertility program. And what we're looking at here is these 3 different timings, essentially. We're looking at that fixed 5-6 that might have been combined with a herbicide application. That T2, where we're really targeting that flag leaf, and flag leaf is really critical for yield development. And then that T3 application, so at flowering to protect from head scab. We did what we call a meta-analysis. So we pulled all this data and looked at differences compared to the non-treated, the no fungicide treatment, to see how that was driving things. So here's a graphic, and I know I've showed this before, but I think it's a really helpful graphic just to get a sense of how the data looks. So of course, not every time when we spray a fungicide do we see a positive response, but out of the bulk of these studies, we tended to see a fairly positive response. And compared to soybean and corn, I'd say wheat is one of the certainly the most responsive crops. So you can see all these various colored bars here just representing the difference from the non-treated check there. So the blue is showing a T1 and T3, so 2 applications. Those grayed out bars are showing that flowering application timing. The green is showing that flag leaf timing. And the red is just showing that T1, that early timing, fixed 5-6, perhaps 7 application timing. So just in summary then, I was a little bit surprised to see from that early fungicide timing, that T1, we were picking up a response of around about a 4 bushel protection. Of course, this isn't going to mean that if you get out and spray at T1, you're necessarily going to see a 4 bushel response, but on average from across these studies, that's what we saw. The T2 application was just a little bit under 7 bushels. That T3 at the flowering was about 7.5 bushels. So when we added them together, it wasn't quite additive. When we looked at the T1, T3, we were seeing about a 10.5 bushel from that T5 fixed 5-6 application followed by that flowering application. Okay. Kurt Steinke and I have followed up on this, and we have a little bit of data we'll talk about at the upcoming wheat field day up at the Saginaw Valley Research Farm in a couple of weeks' time. Just trying to look at stacking a 3rd application in there. Did that provide any additional benefit? So fungicide timing, the biggest thing is that the largest yield protection comes from protecting that flag leaf And that can be applied at flowering and giving protection at the flag leaf, unless we have really aggressive disease development, such as septoria moving up through the canopy, attacking that flag leaf before flowering, or something like stripe rust, where it moves in very, very quickly and gets onto that flag leaf before we've made that flower timing. So, but typically, we're quite concerned most years about the risk of head scab. So that application at flowering, of course, gives us that suppression of head scab. And when we're looking at head scab protection, we're looking at about a 40-50% reduction in head scab development. So the one problem with multiple applications is that it does increase the exposure of these diseases, these organisms to the fungicide. So it does increase our risk of fungicide resistance development. So that would be the other sort of counter message here, that we do have to be mindful of fungicide resistance development. And of course, I've shown you data from what we had collected. Results are clearly going to vary by the wheat variety, the year, and location. So really important to know that. And again, just being aware that fungicide plans might need to change based on the variety susceptibility, really important piece, and of course, the weather and the disease pressure that's coming through from that. Let's switch gears really quick and talk about head scab. So it's the same pathogen that causes ear rot in corn. There's also a few other Fusarium species, a couple others that can infect wheat, and certainly a lot more that can infect corn. But what we're worried about here is trying to protect the flowers, because it's really monocyclic disease. It has that one chance to infect through the flowers at that time of flowering. Of course, we're quite concerned of managing head scab in most seasons. And this was the risk model, the head scab risk model as of yesterday, and I pulled it up today, and it's showing a very similar risk. So we've been essentially at really low risk across Michigan. There's a little bit of risk popping in along the eastern lakeshore there, so just be mindful of where you're at and be mindful of the weather conditions you've received. But this year is really shaping up, at least according to the model, to be quite a low risk year. I'm going to show you that model really quick. So here's a live view of that. You can see parts of southern Indiana are higher, and across Pennsylvania are really at high risk this particular season. So that's a tool that you can jump on and have a look at if you're interested. When should we be spraying? Well, we really should be targeting flowering. So from head emergence, about 2 to 4 days post head emergence is when the anthers, the flowers start popping on those wheat heads. So that's the timing that we really want to be thinking about. Timing is critical for head scab management. We have about a 7-day window from the beginning of flowering, when we've got 50% of those heads with flowers, through to about 7 days post that beginning of flowering to get disease control. There's a little bit of data to suggest that, hitting around about 4 days post the beginning of flowering is ideal. If you had the ability to really time that application, that's when you might want to try and do that, just to try and get the most amount of DON suppression that you can. But generally, within that 7-day window is ideal. You go later than that, your fungicide efficacy is going to drop off considerably. Go earlier, the same thing. And for barley, we're looking about 4 to 6 days post-heading for disease control on that crop. So we've got a number of different products now available for head scab control, and these are also available on the Crop Protection Network. We'll put some links up on the website so you can look at the fungicide list of products and how they rank for disease control. So we've been screening these newer products, so that Prosaro and Prosaro Pro now, Carumba, which is sort of going away, Miravis Ace and Spherix, all provide really decent control. Now, the quick message here is that manage your expectations. If we are in a really high risk year, you're only really going to drop that disease pressure by about half, and that DON level by about half. And really importantly too, make sure you get good coverage of the wheat head. So we want to either use twin jet nozzles or have forward and backward facing nozzles to increase coverage around that head. We don't want to just paint the front side of that head as we're moving through the field. Coverage is essential. These are the takeaways. I think the most important thing is resistance, variety selection for any disease management. So if you're getting hit with stripe rust, consider what variety you're growing and maybe think about a different variety. Same with head scab, really important to think about variety selection for management first, and then think about that fungicide layered on top of that. So I'll finish there. The last thing I'll say is we're getting occasionally a few more reports of stinking smut or dwarf bunt. It's a seed-borne disease, so if you're saving seed, be very careful. Get that seed professionally treated. A good fungicide will help reduce that risk there. So I'll wrap it up there, Monica, and be happy to take questions.
All right, so we'll start, Marty. I think Peter was first in the Q&A box, if you don't mind. So
yeah, absolutely. I can just jump straight in. So
great.
Peter there is just asking about, what is better in terms of disease or vomitoxin management? Is it a fungicide or is it variety resistance? And I would probably have to go with variety resistance. I think that's generally has a bigger pull on controlling vomitoxin or mycotoxins. Fungicides are just another piece to that. And if you're using them in combination, that's the best way to do it. But if you had to choose one, I would probably start with variety resistance.
All right, and then next we had one about late planted wheat that is uneven. Like in one field, I'll see a huge maturity range too. So what's worth spraying?
Yeah. So is it worth spraying? So it depends here what diseases are you managing. If there's no disease, you don't really have to be managing too much, right? So typically with any fungicide application, the more disease pressure that is there, the greater yield protection you're going to get with spraying a fungicide. If we're just thinking sort of more about head scab and we're really concerned, we've got a susceptible variety, maybe we're growing a white variety, we need that lower DON number. Yes, it may very well still be worth spraying. What we try and do then is just try and target the majority of the heads at flowering. And I think that maybe leads into Phil's question too. So Phil's question there is about delayed fungicide application. So I said the ideal window is certainly that 7-day window from the beginning of flowering. You have about 7 days to get that product on to get good efficacy and control. So that's all well and good, but like we were just talking about, if there's other heads that are still coming up, still flowering, you may certainly still see some benefit from that. So that the benefit is going to certainly reduce with time. Those heads that have already perhaps been infected, we might not get as much protection on those, as much curative activity. It's much better to be within that window, but there may still be some efficacy. It's just going to depend, unfortunately, on where that crop is at, and again, what diseases we're managing. And then how long do fungicides last after spraying? So typically, I think, we would say probably around about 2 weeks, thereabouts. So if we're thinking about stripe rust, of course, if we're out there and we spray, we're knocking down the amount of disease that's there and the amount of spores that are being released from that crop. So that's really critical. So the benefit might extend outside of when we've actually still got fungicide that's active in the leaves by knocking down the amount of disease, but typically about 2 weeks. Stripe rust, I mentioned timing was really important. Thanks, Mitch, for the question. Does choice of chemistry matter, or does that have an effect on yield? Essentially, no. Fortunately, pretty much all of the fungicides that we have available to us are rated as excellent or very good on our efficacy charts. So that's good news. You don't have to be too worried there. There's certainly, if we're managing head scab, we're really limited now to a short list of fungicides that can be used. Of course, just be aware of crop stage. We don't want to be putting strobilurin chemistries onto heads that are out, because that may actually exacerbate any mycotoxin that is there, and it's off-label. So just be mindful of crop stage. I think that might have been all the questions. Oh, with stripe rust in wheat, how does that affect our plans for corn? It doesn't at all, thank goodness. So the stripe rust is very specific to wheat. It can affect some other grasses, but not corn. So other sort of weedy species. So don't worry about it. Thankfully, just worry about it in your wheat, and it's not going to affect anything else, which is good.
I think you touched on how there's a crossover in head scab spray.
Yeah.
Okay, just
Yeah. So
here.
putting that head scab spray on, that's right. Those products also have an excellent rating for stripe rust management. So in terms of thinking about timing, if you were able to wait until you were flowering and you came in and put that head scab timing on, you're probably set. That head scab timing is probably going to give you good protection of that canopy from stripe rust.
Okay, and then someone did ask if this disease is seen in rye, any of these diseases.
Oh, rust, absolutely. Yep. All of our grass species can be affected by rust. There may be different ones that are more prominent on rye.
All right, so even like triticale, if you have that out for a forage, it's something that could get.
I would still be out there scouting, right? I mean, I think the key is to be aware of what's going on. I very often get calls from folks that have oats out there and crown rust of oats. It sneaks up on people. So it's a different rust disease, but just, be aware of what's out there. And use your field history as well. Like, have you dealt with that, 4 or 5 years ago? Be aware that could pop back up if the weather is right.
Okay, I believe you've answered all the questions I see right now in the Q&A or in the chat box and the Q&A. Any of the other specialists on? I thought I saw Chris Defonzo. Hey, and
I am here, yes.
how's it going?
Lots of things are happening in the insect world. So I've gotten a few pictures of true armyworm damage and black cutworm damage. Again, that came from a lot of times it was cover crops that didn't die effectively over the winter. So a result of the mild winter, and then they will colonize an egg lay into that. And then people planted early, they were trying to plant early. Alfalfa weevil had pupated on campus. So I'm guessing in southern and central Michigan, we're kind of switching over from alfalfa weevil now to potato leafhopper, which is here. So that means getting out your sweep net. Asiatic garden beetle, I got pictures of pupae from Hillsdale County, and I looked up my records from working in Dundee for many years, and that's early, like by about 10 days. Again, just earlier, which is good because they're done feeding. And I've gotten a lot of pictures of plants that are kind of cut off. And in some cases, it's all the way down the row. An insect is not that smart. It's not marching down the row. That's probably deer damage. But the other thing we're seeing, and I'm going to demonstrate for those online with this tiny piece of plant that I got from a plant this morning in my office. The plant, oh, it's not very good in my little thing. There we go. The plant is bent over. And the hypocotyl, the hypocotyl, this is a beans, is coming out of the ground, and it's like it gets stuck, and then it breaks, pretend it breaks, and what's left is a little stem. An insect didn't do that. And you'll find that the rest of the plant is trapped under the ground. And Christy and I were digging yesterday in one of her plots, and it looked like it was planted deep, and it just couldn't struggle out that whole way and make it out. Or maybe there's some crusting or something else is going on. So that kind of when it's bent over and then you're finding the cotyledons trapped underground, the insect didn't do that. It's something else going on, environmental or deep planting, or it was cold and things kind of lollygagged along. And yeah, and then the last thing is there was a lot of seed corn maggot out there. Again, early planting into egg laying. But those adults are coming out now. And I don't know if you've noticed, if you've been in the field, there's a lot of small flies around, like thousands of them flying around some of those are seed corn maggot adults, and they're emerging now. So unless you're planting vegetables next, like in the next couple of weeks for field crops, that's kind of the end of the situation typically. Because again, it's related to green material that they're attracted to. So that's what I've got. I'll send the Fons facts out probably tomorrow with pictures, because I think the pictures would really help rather than me using a piece of plant from my office. So
Yes, much appreciated. Although I liked the simulation.
I had to do it on the fly there. So
The visual is good. And I just wanted to mention with deer damage, since I guess that can be something I love to talk about. If you do want to spraying these small immature plants is really critical. So if you want to go ahead and put a first spray out of some type of deer deterrent, this is the time you'd want to do that on soybeans. There's some that are labeled for like a trifoliate, but a lot of them are that like unifoliate coming out, and beans is a great time to get that early spray on, especially in a 2-spray pass.
There was a question that just came in. We both got kids. Any advantage to adding propiconazole to Prosaro now that there's some large patches of stripe rust visible? So not necessarily. I mean, it's not going to hurt, but you're already in that Prosaro, you already have 2 DMI chemistries in there. You have prothioconazole and tebuconazole in that Prosaro. So it won't hurt, but I don't think you necessarily gain a great deal. I mean, I guess it just depends on costs as well, but I don't think you're going to, that Prosaro itself has an excellent rating on stripe rust.
Right. I also see we have Dennis Pennington on. I don't know if there's any, I know we've talked a lot about wheat, Dennis, but is there anything else we needs to be mentioned there?
Yeah, the only thing else I would mention, we do have a wheat field day today in Erie County, our state location. It's just east of Seaboing, in the southeast corner of Bayport Road, and Seaboing Road. So that starts at 10 o'clock this morning. Everybody's welcome to come out that lives up in that area. So yeah, I'm on my way there now. So we'll see everybody there.
Great. I'm gonna paste the link to that article because your service is a little patchy, which is pretty normal for driving across Michigan. So I went ahead and put the link there to the
Sorry
field day
about
so you can
that.
find that seating location. Yeah, no problem, Dennis. There's CCA and RUP credits offered there and cookies if you're interested in that. Just trying to see if there any other specialists on that have an update, and it's hard to dig through all the names. So it'd be a good time for you to speak up. I see Keely's on. Keely, were you able to get all of your wheat virus samples, or would you need more? Or maybe Marty.
I think we've pretty much, so Keely's a master's student in my lab, and what we're doing this year is getting a better handle on the wheat viruses that are out there in Michigan so that we can better inform you all of what's happening. I know personally, like on some of our research ground, we have been hit pretty hard in the past by wheat streak mosaic virus. If you're not managing that, it can be quite damaging. So what we're essentially doing is trying to get a good handle across the state what viruses are there and at what incidence level. So I think we're fairly set now. We're shooting for about 120 fields across Michigan to get a really good handle on what's there, and we'll repeat this again next year as well.
All right, great. I thought good opportunity if you didn't have enough samples.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and thank you everyone that's participated in that. Really appreciate it.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions, and I see that Jenna did put in a little more details on the location for that field day. So with that, if there's nobody else, I just want to thank everyone for getting on. I believe it's the 11th of the season, and please join us next week to talk. It sounds like all things spraying. That looks like a fun one.
Monica, there is a question in the Q&A.
Oh, that one sneaked in there. Sorry about that. Any performance data on the effectiveness of deer damage products? Yeah, John, yes, we do have a an array of data. So one research, a pretty good comparative research plot, I think it was over like 7 or 8 products, was done by AgriLiquid last year, funded by Michigan Soybean. So I can go ahead and answer with my email address. If you want, I can send you the data spread. But what I would, and just to summarize, is that if you have high pressure, like fields completely decimated, nothing left, high pressure, not just edge of fields, but your whole fields are getting pretty well, like 10 bushel lower averages, we have not found something that is a complete like cure for that. I love to say that the awns that you find in wheat that prevent the deer from really doing much damage, I haven't found that solution in soybeans. We do know that sugar content's a huge driver. So if you wanted to select for lower sugar content, working with your seed dealer and doing some sampling, leaf tissue testing on your own soybeans for wet soluble sugar, that is something you can do. But otherwise, right now it's a combination of spraying certain products, using fencing, considering strategically not planting soybeans with really small fields surrounded by woods, you know, doing a whole farm management idea. So that's a quick response to that. If you have medium damage, I think several different products can offer some coverage, and getting that early spray on is important. All right, sorry about that. Okay, I think we're not sorry. That was a great question, but I think we're ready to end now, and I will put my contact information in there for you. If you can grab that email, I'd be able to message you later with the rest of the data. Otherwise, I'm very Googleable. Monica Jean, MSUE. All right, thank you everyone for getting on another great virtual breakfast, and we hope to see you next week.